The reorganization meeting for the Plum Borough School District Board of School Directors will come to order. If you would please join me in the pledge to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I will now call roll of the members of the board. Mr. Adams.
Here.
Dr. Anderson.
Here.
Mr. Caligiuri.
Here.
Ms. Shutterwitz.
Here.
Mr. Devine.
Here.
Mr. Hill.
Here.
Mr. Sokolsky.
Here.
Mrs. Stepnick.
I'm here.
Ms. Wetmore.
Present.
Student Representative Ms. Price.
Here.
At this time, we open the floor for citizens' comments on agenda items. As there are none, we will move on to the purpose of the annual reorganization meeting is to officially organize the board for the coming year by electing a permanent president and vice president. The first order of business is to elect a president pro tempore, which is the temporary president, to chair this reorganization meeting. May I have nominations for temporary president?
I nominate Mr. Caligiuri.
I think Mrs. Macker is doing a great job, though.
She did. I would like for her to continue, but I think we have to.
Are there any other nominations at this time? Seeing none, and if there are no objections, we will close nominations. We move to have Mr. Caligiuri as temporary president to continue the reorganization meeting. Are there any objections? The vote then is in favor of Mr. Caligiuri, who is now the temporary president, and I now turn it over to him.
All right. You all have attached to the agenda a list of all the qualified, legally elected members of the Board of School Directors for the year now beginning. Does anyone see any errors or inaccuracy in the list? Does anyone desire that the list be read out loud? No? We'll move on. Our board policy number 005 states that the election of an officer requires the winning candidate to receive a majority of all votes cast by those present and voting. Since there are 9 members present, 5 votes are necessary to win if everyone present casts a vote. Our policy also states that if no one receives sufficient votes on the first ballot, a runoff vote will be held between the 2 candidates who received the most votes in the first ballot. Are there any questions on the procedure?
No, sir.
None. I will now open the floor to nominations for the office of Vice President.
I nominate Mr. Caligiuri.
Mr. Caligiuri has been nominated for Vice President.
I nominate Megan Chudderwitz.
Mrs. Chudderwitz has been nominated for Vice President. Are there any further nominations? Seeing none, and if there is no objections, I declare the nominations closed. As we did before, we will vote by voice roll call vote, with each member stating the nominee of their choice as the secretary calls the roll. The secretary will record how each member has voted. Does everyone understand the procedure?
Yes.
Ms. Secretary, please state the vote tally. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead and call it out. I'm already reading it.
Whenever I call your name, please state the name of the candidate that you would like to be the vice president. We are choosing either Mr. Caligiuri or Ms. Chudderwitz. Mr. Hill.
Mr. Caligiuri.
Mr. Sokolsky.
Miss Chudderwitz.
Mrs. Stepnick.
Mr. Caligiuri.
Ms. Wetmore.
Mr. Caligiuri.
Mr. Adams. Could you repeat that, please? Thank you. Dr. Anderson.
Mr. Caligiuri.
Mr. Caligiuri,
Mr. Caligiuri,
Ms. Chudowitz,
Ms. Chudowitz.
Mr. Devine,
Mr. Caligiuri.
Who won?
all right, so that is Chudowitz with 2 votes, Caligiuri with 7. That moves the motion forward that Mr. Caligiuri is our new vice president.
thank you. I will now open the floor to nominations for the office of president.
I nominate Mr. Devine.
I nominate Mr. Sokolsky.
Mr. Devine and Mr. Sokolsky have been nominated for president. Are there any other nominations for the office of president? All right, I declare the nominations closed. Same thing, we will vote on by voice roll call vote with each member.
I have some background noise.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There's 2 or 3 names.
2 names.
We have 2 names. Whenever I call your name on the roll call, please state whether or not you would like the president to be Mr. Devine or Mr. Sokolsky. Mr. Sokolsky,
Mr. Sokolsky.
Mrs. Stepnick,
Mr. Devine.
Ms. Wetmore,
Mr. Devine.
Mr. Adams,
Mr. Devine.
Dr. Anderson,
Mr. Devine.
Mr. Caligiuri,
Mr. Devine.
Ms. Chudowitz,
Mr. Sokolsky.
Mr. Devine,
Mr. Devine.
Mr. Hill.
Mr. Devine.
In a roll call vote with Sokolsky having 2 votes and Mr. Devine having 7 votes, Mr. Devine is now the new president.
Congratulations. I will now turn the meeting over to our new board president, Mr. Devine.
Thank you, Mr. Caligiuri. On behalf of the board, we appreciate the leadership that you and Dr. Anderson have provided over the past year, and I look forward to seeing what the year ahead of us brings. This seat is not unfamiliar to me, and I appreciate the opportunity to sit here again and the trust the board has placed on me once again. The work we have done to this point has kept us moving in a positive direction, but please do not think we are done. I will review our lead board responsibilities over the next few days, and if you have any desire to change responsibilities, please let me know by email this coming Thursday, and I will have our assignments emailed to you by Friday. Things are going well, and I'm hopeful you're all happy where you are. However, this is the time to realign if needed.
Mr. Devine, if I may make a comment, if I'm permitted. No matter what, I always feel this is the time of the year which we can reflect and think about how we can do better. And you talk about the lead board liaisons and other things. I would like to see some type of communication sort of, while we have our capsules, they're great, they're useful, but when things happen, I would like to see a better chain, a telephone line, telephone chain, further communicate with all board members, just so, I do feel like at times there's some that don't fully know what's going on, and I don't know if it's a matter of just not being fully available or whatnot, but I would like us to try to find a better way in which we all communicate if there's something that goes on throughout the course of the week, because, we are sort of told, read the capsules at the end of the week, so if you don't get on there and read it, you might miss something. So I would just ask that maybe we reflect as a group on how we can better keep ourselves organized and communicating, where we're not violating the sunshine, of course, but how we communicate in a better manner when things go on, or if information needs disseminated in a quicker manner. I would just ask that some consideration be taken for that and some sort of, something laid out for the whole board.
Thank you. I think open communication is always a positive, so I'm not opposed to anything along those lines. At this time, I'd like to open the floor to citizens' comments on non-agenda items. All right, upcoming public meetings, board discussion and budget workshop, Tuesday, December 6th, 2022, here in the library, immediately following this meeting. And then we have a board action meeting on Tuesday, December 20th, 7 o'clock, here in the library. I would now like to call the meeting adjourned. Do I have a motion? and a
Motion.
Second? Meeting adjourned.
It's like riding a bike.
Mr. Hill was really eager to end that.
We going right into this one? I'd like to call the December 6th, 2022 school board meeting and budget workshop to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. We already did that.
We're
One more
gonna
time.
leave that. Simon did not say.
All right, roll call, please.
Mr. Adams. I believe he's left the meeting. Dr. Anderson.
Here.
Mr. Caligiuri.
Here.
Ms. Chudowitz.
Here.
Mr. Devine.
Here.
Mr. Hill.
Here.
Mr. Sokolsky.
Here.
Mrs. Stepnick.
Here.
Ms. Wetmore.
Still here.
Student Representative, Ms. Price.
Here.
Thank you, Ms. Macro. This time I'd like to open the floor to citizens' comments on agenda items. Still none. Personnel, myself, I have nothing for tonight, Ms. Sedlak. All right, student achievement and activities, Dr. Anderson, lead board liaison.
Yep. We have a number of grants to be awarded for Ms. Doty and Ms. Gibson, Mr. Nisley, Ms. Miller, Mr. Pfeiffer, Ms. Pfeiffer, the generous donation of the foundation, and the athletic department receiving the award at the turkey trot. Do we have any comments? Yep, I didn't see you guys over there. Do you guys want to share a little bit more?
Sure.
That'd be awesome.
Do you want us to?
Wherever you would like to, yeah, that would be great.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. I'm Kelly Gibson, one of the school psychologists here. I'm Janelle Doty. I'm one of the special education teachers here at Plum School District, 20 years. And Plum proud grad. Don't hold it.
There we go.
She's probably better at yelling than me.
I did teach kindergarten for 5 years.
Crowd noise is deafening, we can't hear.
So we just wanted to share a little bit of information about the Transition Discoveries Grant. This is the third year that we have been awarded grant funding to support our transition initiatives. And when we talk about transition, we're talking about post-secondary planning for students who have IEPs, which starts at age 14, so typically 9th through 12th grade. And we're talking about preparing students for life after high school, so training or education, jobs, and independent living. And so Janelle and I have really been working hard over the last couple of years to build the capacity of the district to better serve our students and expand on opportunities. And so Transition Discoveries in 2020 and 2021 was a systems level framework where we surveyed stakeholders. Some board members had taken that survey along with parents, our students. We had many staff take it, gen ed, special ed, paraprofessionals. We even had some custodial staff take it to really get a broad view of where our strengths and needs are related to transition. And what came out of that was that preparing students for employment was an area where we could grow. So we have been working to develop action plans, and we were fortunate enough to be awarded another grant this year, which is the Transition Discoveries, but also combined with the state's Competitive Integrated Employment Grant. So that's why it's more funding than the past 2 years were. And so we're very excited to have this opportunity. We have actually already gone through several parts of the first year of this newer grant in the past 2 years. And so it's a great opportunity for us too, because we get to serve in kind of a leadership role with the other cohorts, the other LEAs in the state that are going to be participating. So we will continue to, I think we're going to be maybe doing some more of the survey to just get some updated information, but then continuing to move forward. So what is up here is our long-term goal, and what we're working toward is when students graduate who have IEPs, they will have had the opportunity to take 3 workplace tours, 2 job shadow experiences, and 1 paid or unpaid work experience. So we want this for every student with an IEP. And of course, our students with IEPs have a broad range of strengths and needs, and so we want all of them to have these opportunities. I'm going to let Janelle talk a little bit about the Transition Discoveries course, which was something that was born out of this initiative and that we're planning on continuing, and will also serve as kind of the, what do I want to call it? The hub for where all of this can really occur.
So this time last year, we were working on a new course for a program of studies here up at the high school. As the special education department lead, I had the opportunity to sit at the table and work with Ms. Sedlak and talk with our special education teachers and general ed teachers about a course that could help support our students. You know, I like to bite off more than I can chew, so I would have loved to do 9 through 12 plus, but we focused on 9. And then Ms. Sedlak talked me into 10th grade. But the idea was to focus on 9th graders. I don't know if any of you are familiar, but our 9th graders, they do take a health class, and in that health class they do a lot of career exploration, and they have to write a career paper, which is one of the artifacts for Chapter 339. So it's a really important piece. However, only being up here for 4 years, this is my 4th year, 3 years, I've seen a lot of our 9th graders struggle. And why do they struggle? They're not engaged, they don't understand, they don't see the purpose. They don't even know how to read a schedule. When they get that schedule in August, they're like, I have 12 periods a day. They don't understand it. So the idea of Transition Discoveries was to give 9th graders an opportunity to, 1, understand a schedule, 2, improve your communication skills, checking your Gmail. I have seniors that don't even check their email. Organizing yourself using Google Calendar, organizing your Google Classroom. There are ways to turn on features for reminders, to turn off reminders, so it doesn't junk up your email box. So we worked on email etiquette. Mrs. Bartella was so happy. She's getting emails with capital letters now and punctuation, but email etiquette is something that we look at. It is a graded course. Our 9th graders focus on, we have a curriculum that we use, portions of it's ORI Learning, I believe it's called. And there are 8 components. One of them is that cultivating communication. There is understanding your needs and strengths. I've got to cheat my notes, sorry. We look at exploring career options. So we finished, most of us, finished our career papers. And part of that is the students learn how to set up to print to the library. Most of them didn't know they had access to print. So we're teaching them strategies to be successful 9 through 12. We also talk about, this has been really difficult. October was Disability Awareness Month, and the sad truth is a lot of our students don't know that they have disabilities. And it could be because of the stereotypes, it could be because it's tough having those conversations and being vulnerable among their peers. But we're talking about disability awareness and understanding empathy. You know, we want to take a tour down and see what our life skills program offers. What does our autistic support program offer? And really trying to develop an inclusive community here at Plum High School, which is just a tiny portion of the overall transition picture. With New Year's coming, we talk about New Year's resolutions. We're also going to talk about setting personal goals. Right now, our students are tracking their grades weekly, and they're using a Google spreadsheet. So every time we meet, they record their percentages, and they learned how to calculate averages. And they're looking to see what is their pattern. Are their grades going up or are their grades going down? If it's going down, why did you drop? Let's go into Sapphire. Are you missing assignments? So we're teaching them to look critically at their own, at their own work. And I think it's really going well. It is a challenge. Nobody wants to talk about the hard stuff with disabilities. So we still have a lot of way to go, but I am really excited. And I think we just have a lot to grow. So there you have it.
And developing that self-advocacy.
Yes.
So that starts with understanding where your strengths and needs are. So the grant funding helps to provide materials and curriculum for that course, for example, for the ORI course. We also have used it to incentivize participation. This work requires time and energy and people, and we all have lots going on, so it helps when there can be some incentives to, for both the community members. We have a team of some community members that include Mr. Caligieri has attended several of our meetings, as well as some parents, and we're working to recruit more and recruit students. And so incentives always help with that. And then also training opportunities. So one of the things we talked about building our own capacity is job coaching, which is a set of skills. So it's not just sending a paraprofessional to accompany a student on a job shadow or a job tour or a job experience, but there's actual skills. And so Patton has a training course. And so we would like to train some of our paraprofessionals up here so that they can serve in that role and better support our students. So we appreciate all of your support, and you can email us anytime you have any questions or want to get involved. We would love to have you.
Kelly and Janelle, I just want to thank you as a superintendent. Bringing in $45,000, it's a heck of a lot of money, and it doesn't come easy. And we know that both of you do it for the right reasons, because you have some very special kids that you have the privilege to work with, and I know you see it as a privilege. And don't cry, because I know you're going to cry.
I told you 20 years.
I know, I'm not trying to make you cry.
This is awesome.
But it just goes to show the dedication and devotion that you have to those kids. And what a perfect night to talk about it when we're talking about budget, right?
Remember that, right?
So, great job.
Well, and I would say Miss Doty was one who was, when I served it, and Mr. Hill, you were there with, at the Special Olympics, just watching you in action was awesome that day, and just being able to see that and serve alongside you was great. And I will echo that appreciation for all that you guys are doing for our students. That's wonderful. It looked like Ms. Wetmore had a comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, first I wanted to ask a question just for clarification. When you refer to ninth graders, is this all ninth graders on IEPs?
So that gets to be a little tricky. We are recommending, we did talk with our 8th grade counselors and case managers that all incoming ninth graders be recommended for this course as a departmental recommendation. However, over the course of the summer, there were a couple concerns. And so we had conversations, case managers had those conversations. It's kind of like one of those steps. If your child doesn't need the support, is special education right for him or her? So it opens up that conversation of transitioning and exiting IEPs, because a lot of our students and parents think that an IEP is forever and goes to college, and that is not true either. So we're excited.
And then I do just want to echo what has been said. You guys know that this is something that's near and dear to my heart. This is something I live in my everyday life. And so I greatly appreciate you have taken on so much in the last couple of years with the Special Olympics. And, to see what happens here at our district, our Best Buddies program, it's just heartwarming. And so I am very thankful for all of your hard work.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can I just also say, Ms. Sedlak and Dr. Walsh, to me, every single thing that they've said are awesome things that every one of our students need transitioning into high school. And I don't know if there's a creative way to do that and I know, Dr. Walsh, you and I have talked transition all the time. So doing that transition stuff, and maybe some of what is 9th grade for them is 6th grade or 7th grade for some of our other students. But I can tell you that email function for my own children sometimes doesn't go as well as it should. That reading a schedule, my 7th grader said, wait a minute, I have this many classes and I don't understand, right? So all of those things, I think, onboarding of our students to each building is really, really important. And Mrs. Martello had my son and probably didn't like that he didn't, and he doesn't have an IEP, but he's a normal kid who texts a lot, you know what I mean? And I don't mean to use the word normal like that, but I just think it would behoove us to take a look at this for every student in our building, and these guys can have focused efforts on the students that might need more support. But I think there's a lot of good to be said, especially the long-term goal. We don't have kids doing job shadowing, work experience, workplace tours. We should have that for a long-term goal for every single student in this district. Okay, sorry, off my horse.
I agree, and I would also add to that. I think one of the most important words I heard were critical thinking.
Yep.
And I feel like that's just something you can never get too much of for the kids, so.
Yep. Okay, do we have 5? I think I read through all of them. Do we have 5 to move all of the grants forward?
Yes, ma'am.
Any concerns? Okay, awesome.
Yes, absolutely. Boy, Mustang Foundation's giving more money, that's awesome.
All right, and then, okay, we have for Mrs. Beasy to attend the overnight conference, March 30th and April 1st. Any questions or concerns? Do we have 5 to move that forward? All right, and then we're on to the calendar. Anybody need to talk through it?
I can just give some highlights of it, and then if any board members have anything to put in, they can. Last year, I think we approved the calendar in January or February, if I'm not mistaken, and we decided we were going to try and move that up so families had the opportunity to plan. That was some of the feedback that we got back.
Yep.
People wanted to hear it a little bit earlier. The other feedback that we got back was that they would like to see school maybe start a little bit later. They also asked it to end earlier, but those two things don't work. So, you got to pick one or the other. And so we decided to start the school year a little bit later. This year was on the 18th of August, and we are going to kick it back to the following week, which is the 23rd of August. Again, families have an opportunity to plan. The other feedback that we got back is that people really liked having the spring break. We're going to make it a little bit longer when you count in the weekends, because it's going to be, you're going to have Good Friday off, then you're going to have those 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, and then the entire week off after that, and then another Saturday and Sunday. So it should be a good break for families to be able to spend time with each other. The board should know that we got feedback from the PBA. They were enthusiastic about it. We also added, this year we added our department leaders to be part of the process. So, and the board obviously has had input through that. I've put it in my capsule multiple times to provide feedback. The one thing that we kind of got a little bit late is the election day. Because it is a presidential primary, it's going to be back in April. So before this year, this year it's in May. So that will be on April 23rd. Those are the highlights. Now, and in order to be efficient, which no good deed goes unpunished, I decided to put the board meetings in there as well. The one change that we have in there is that the administration is recommending one meeting for October. If you recall, we recommended one meeting this year, but the board decided they wanted 2 meetings. If you looked at the October board meeting, there wasn't a whole lot on there. The reason I put it back on there is because I want to be respectful of my administrator's time coming out and the people who come out, and I also want to be respectful of the board's time. And just don't want to have a meeting. But if you disagree, that's fine, and we can change it.
If we have the board meetings on the calendar, we happen to move one, is there any repercussions?
As long as you advertise it.
It just has to be advertised. This wouldn't be considered as like false advertisement if somebody says this is advertisement.
No, we have the right to go ahead and change it.
Okay. How are we still ending in May? We're still, last day of school still in May.
Yeah, but we're
How do we
going
do
to
that?
the very last day in May, and I will tell you, part of my issue with moving it, the school year forward to the 23rd is coming back after Memorial Day. This year, we weren't doing that. So we come back from Memorial Day, we just have to be focused and make sure that we're not ending the year, we're kicking off the next year.
Right.
So, okay. So, comments for the board?
I think the biggest comment I would just say, and I get it, and I think the public, people go either way. As an educator, I know that if we front load, we end up with more instructional days before our assessments, which is why front loading sometimes is better, and being out after Memorial Day, I think, was awesome this past year. I get why people don't like it being so early, so I think it's somewhat of a compromise, and I would just hope that, just like you're saying, that we would use those days as transition days rather than playing videos, doing whatever, and kids really aren't, it's not beneficial. They're kind of wasted instruction days, so.
Dr. Anderson, I agree with you completely on those last 3 days. I will say for the record, and I waited to hold my comments about it in public in a sense, because I still believe President's Day should be a scheduled day off. but with a purpose. And if something should transpire, maybe that's an online day or something, but I still believe those kids need a break. It's winter, it's difficult, but why we have President's Day off, I think should be important. I like the later start, and I have no real issue with any of it. I just have a question about Kennywood Picnic Day, because I've heard a lot about that. Our Kennywood Picnic wasn't as well attended as it has been, because it's so late. Can we put in to asking for that to be changed? I know that takes time, like bump it up a little earlier into June. I know that not a lot of people on here, Plum tradition has always been, it's been during the school year or almost immediately after it ends. This is just really late.
We'll ask. Kennywood assigns those days, but we can ask.
You can actually make the request, and I think they get us in a rotation or some story. It takes a couple of years, so it'd be nice if we can get back in rotation where it's a little bit earlier into June. I do believe it wasn't, I was there and it wasn't well attended, as it's been in past years, but it's just too far out.
And I have a question. We are having, on this schedule, you have us for one meeting in October. Why wouldn't we have 2 in October and 1 in November?
You can certainly do that, yeah.
I mean,
I like that better, it's less hectic, but also I would ask them what the meetings, we have one a month. No policies get passed or anything on those agendas, because I do believe the public needs to hear the conversations on the policies before we vote on them. And with a 24-hour post before a meeting, it's not, I don't believe it's really in the effort of transparency.
I also feel the same as far as transparency. I talked last year about the fact of having 2 meetings a month, so that anything that's brought up in the second week, the public has a chance to review and then respond 2 weeks later in the action meeting. By having 1 meeting, we move into a consent agenda, which doesn't allow much of a response, and we're assuming that there's not going to be any response in October. I totally accept the fact of either June, July, or August of having 0 meetings or 1 meeting. I think we recognize our clerical staff at that point. In fact, Mr. Devine brought that up last year to me, and when I brought up the calendar, and I agree. I think they definitely deserve that time to themselves. But I would ask that we reconsider the second meeting in October and stick to the fact that we have 2 meetings a month, except June, July, and August.
Just to clarify, consent agenda is for action meetings. It doesn't have anything to do with discussion meetings. So that doesn't have anything to do with the public getting an opportunity to engage or the board members to engage in discussion. Consent agenda just allows you to conduct business more efficiently in one motion. But that doesn't preclude anybody from doing anything in public or having any engagement.
Understand, but just as misstepped.
Mr. Skolsky, I was speaking. Additional discussion is also allowed at the action meetings as well. So once something goes to vote, we still have the opportunity to discuss further.
Well, I would agree with both of you, with both arguments, and disagree at the same time with both arguments. If we put out an agenda, and we're all ingrained in this, right? We know what we're looking at, we're putting out an agenda, we have the documents to back up, whatever the case may be. We put out an agenda the Monday before the 1 meeting a month we're gonna have on that, and I agree with this button that maybe November is the meeting one for that month, between election and conferences and, recognizing Veterans Day and Thanksgiving. It's a very short month, and so maybe that is the month going into the holiday season where we only have one, and it not be October. But with that said, we put out an agenda 24 hours before a meeting, and maybe the average person doesn't get an opportunity to look at that agenda, but then they hear, oh wait, school board discussed this policy or this item, and now they're gonna vote on it in 2 weeks. While yes, the consent agenda is to really maximize our time and be more efficient, and you have opportunity to speak post a vote, but the vote's already been done. So once we vote, that's actually now, if it's a policy, for example, that's now policy. Effective that day or the next day, that's the policy, unless we set a different timeline in that. And it doesn't give much response for the public to have the ability to respond. Well, we can say, yes, we're putting it out there, but no, we're really not. And I'm trying to think as the average citizen who isn't fully engaged in all of this all of the time, that they may want to come and express gratitude or concern or question on something. We're not providing that opportunity by doing something all within one day, unless we do that in the things that, again, rather than accepting grants and budgetary items and whatnot, fine, but if we're going to be changing policy or doing something that's a decision that affects the public, and parents, students, taxpayers, however we want to couch those groups, we need to then wait till the following month to vote on those things if we're only going to do one meeting. Because I truly believe this, we're not being transparent by putting it all out there in one night and then voting on it that same night. The consent agenda means nothing to me. It's more about 24 hours before a meeting, and then we're voting on it within 24 or 26 hours, basically. Then we're putting it out there, we're voting on it 26 hours later. And you're assuming people are actually logging into our website to see our agendas at that time. And I think those are a lot of assumptions to make. So I would just ask, if we're going to do something like this, we make it our own practice to wait those 30 days to vote.
Dr. Howland, can you correct me if I'm wrong? If we put in a policy on the agenda for October, we wouldn't vote on it till November anyway, correct?
Most times what we do is we give the board, if you've seen this before, where I've put it on there and said, we skip a month and we come back the following month. That's generally, especially when there's a lot of policies. So we've historically done that. And the reason October is, I mean, Mrs. Wedmore, we've had discussions internally too about November, and we thought about that. The only reason we put October down is because there's generally not a whole lot that's going on with the school year started. There isn't a whole lot being moved forward, and so that's why we've chose October. But it's just another night. That's
Is that a combined? Is that a combined meeting?
Yes.
Is there a chance that if I'll meet every day if you want, I don't really care. But if we determine it's one meeting, can we still post the discussion agenda on the second meeting day of the month, so that they can see that in advance? And give them more than 24 hours. Right.
Yeah, we could certainly do that. That's going to.
I want to make sure the public has access to the information
That's the whole
well before 24 hours. Like I said, 24 hours, and it's basically 26 hours later we voted on something, whatever that might be. And I use policy as an example, but my point being, we're voting on things 26 hours after posting them and assuming people have seen them, and then you still have opportunity to talk. Well, we've already voted on them.
So is that something that maybe we could do that?
It's just going to take a little bit more discipline on the administration point of view, but that's not hard. We can do that.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any?
Anyone have any further discussion with new points to make?
Do we want to keep the board meetings on here with all the discussion?
What was I thinking here? But I did it. So.
I mean,
it was an attempt to be efficient. That's all. And talking about transparency, this is really the calendar that people look at.
Yeah.
That's another reason why we put the board meetings on there. So.
I like that it's on here, but if we're going to be a moving target on a lot of these meetings, I don't want it to backfire on us, because they'd be like, well, now you're not being transparent because it was this day, not that day.
You know, I'm just going to be flat out frank with you. I think a lot of people use the word transparency.
I know. I hate that word.
We put more documents out there than any other district that's out there. And we put out all our documents, probably more than we and we're definitely required to do.
All right.
Every document is out there for folks to see that's not related to personnel. So the notion that we're not transparent it drives me insane. But be that as it may, I understand Mrs. Stepnick's point of view that, hey, if you're going to vote on it, would it be acceptable to the board if we put out the agenda 72 hours in advance? or the week of, or I'm sorry, the week before, like a week ahead of time.
I'd be
We
perfectly
could certainly
fine with
do that. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah.
That way, and I mean, if something's controversial, chances are people are going to know about it anyhow, and they're going to comment, and the documents are out there anyhow for them to see, oftentimes more than 48 hours in advance. But
Yeah.
if we put an agenda together a week ahead of time, would that be acceptable to the board?
Now, if we do that a week ahead of time, and can we still make changes to it 24 hours prior to the meeting?
I'm going to say yes, but I'll defer to Dane.
I just want to make sure I'm following here. So you put out the agenda, and you
Right.
want to make a change to the agenda?
No,
Les?
let me clarify. So on the meetings that we have one meeting per month, we would put out the agenda for that meeting a week in advance.
As a
Mr.
courtesy.
Hill is saying, if there is a change to that agenda, can it be done up until 24 hours in advance of the meeting?
Absolutely.
There you go.
Then I'm
Right,
fine
so
with
you're
it.
putting it out a week ahead of time as a courtesy.
I'm fine with
By
it.
law, we can only adjust it, we can.
As long as we
Yeah.
note that when we do that, that
We have to-
changes can be made up to 24 hours or something
But
on
does that
the
mean
top
we
of
have to
that.
publish it twice and spend money doing that?
No, we just have, no, we're not publishing it because we're just putting it online.
Online, yeah.
The meeting is still being advertised.
Jesus, we can put a working agenda online at any time and let people follow it
Like a
every
live.
single day of the year.
Yeah, but that
Yeah.
I'm
puts
just
more
saying,
pressure
like-
on these guys.
No, but I mean, it seems like we're not being orderly when it comes to doing business. You don't want to put an agenda out a week ahead and then change it 4 times. And
Well, I
then
think you could-
24 hours before say, oh, I hope that the people that looked at it a week ago look at it 24 hours in advance.
I think you could
Either
put
pick
on it.
72 hours or 1 week and then it doesn't change.
Yeah, but if you put on it as a courtesy,
Right.
due to there being one meeting this month, as a courtesy, we are providing the agenda to the citizens of Plum Borough 1 week in advance. Please note, changes to the agenda could happen
Yeah.
up until 24
Yeah,
hours.
I think if you put a
before.
disclaimer on it, I think it's
Yep.
fine.
I think,
Yeah, I guess we could put out draft agendas for every meeting.
Then you can change it ahead of time.
And we could change them
I mean,
every
we know
day.
ourselves, looking at our documents,
That makes no
many
sense.
times the agenda's already set. Things get added.
You could change it, you could change it every
But we know
24 hours.
ourselves, we watch our documents, many of the things are already, on the whole, set. There's things that can be added, sure, or changed. But we know that they're pretty much set.
Yeah, well, you were elected, we were elected to represent the people that elected us and to make decisions on their behalf. So I want to give the public as much notice as possible, but giving the public a 1-week draft document that's going to change 4 times is irresponsible. I want the constituents to have a very damn near completed agenda so that they can get their facts together and show up at the meeting when they feel it's necessary. So as things are now, they work fine. And as elected officials, it's your responsibility to communicate with your constituents if you feel like there's something that needs to be addressed and discussed.
I think
Can
more
I
the
ask-
concern
I
is
think
it's
that
24
we're getting
hours.
out of- We're putting a lot of burden on the administration to do something that's gonna change for us.
That's just for, that's just on those couple exceptions. I think for the meetings where we have 2 meetings a month, I think it's fine because people can do the research. They have it 24 hours before the discussion meeting. We discuss it, a couple weeks go by, and then we vote on it. It allows them to do that research. But when it's 1 meeting a month, they have 24 hours. Actually, they just have one they're sitting out at 24 hours and one they're sitting out in that meeting after our discussion to do the research and then come back up in an action meeting. So if they have that information a week early of what's going on, they have
But
more
the
time.
board is informed weeks in advance of all of these items. We're plenty informed. And we can go to our community constituents and ask for feedback at any time. There's no stopping. People have community meetings all the time, every once a month. So, I just don't think it's very orderly to put out a draft agenda a week in advance and then change it 5
Can
times.
I ask a
would put-
question?
Can I-
Ms. Stepnick,
Miss-
please hold on. Michelle? Ms. Stepnick,
Past practice, we've done this, the agenda would always be posted on a Friday before before a meeting. Maybe on this case, it's a Friday, so they have the weekend and that Monday. I don't, maybe that's a compromise here. I disagree, Mike, because you're saying the agenda could change, so it's 7:01 on Monday, I think there's something tell the parents, well, maybe they can't get there for Tuesday at 7 PM. So, and I wouldn't break down confidence of what's on my agendas ahead of time. I'm just going to-
Then you act on their behalf. That's your job. That's why you were elected. Do the work.
But with that
Do the work.
said,
Do the work.
compromise.
That's why you were elected.
We've done in years past, the Friday before a meeting.
Do the work.
agenda would be posted.
Yeah, do the work.
Did to me for a year, you're gonna say that?
Do the work. Do the work. You don't do the work. You can't even navigate the school board. You don't even know how to navigate a meeting.
What are you talking about?
You're giving
Hold on,
me
we're
feedback.
we're getting off topic. I have a
Mr.
question
Devine.
for the administration.
I did
Michelle,
nothing.
Ms. Stepnick, you've been talking and nobody's had a chance.
Sure, no.
Dr. Highland, are we creating a problem here on our own, or is this a real problem? How many emails are you receiving that people don't have a chance to review the agenda? Or Ms. Macro, are you getting emails that people aren't reviewing the agenda?
In all candor, we don't get a lot of feedback, and I don't believe it's because we're not transparent. I just don't believe that. If people are up, we had 100 people here that came, so that people are well aware when we're having board meetings, or 100 people, when people are upset about things, they know about it and they'll come. That's the truth. The reason people are probably not coming is because they're pretty happy with probably the way things are going. And when they're not happy, they'll come. And I just think this notion, I'm just going to be frank, I think we're making ourselves to be more important than what we really are. You know, I really think that's the case. If people think it's important enough, they'll come. Quite frankly, if we just put the October meeting on, we probably would save more time. We're taking more time talking about that, and I just don't know how effective it is. Yeah, I'm trying to be respectful of the board's time. I'm trying to be respectful of my administrator's time to come out on an evening when we don't necessarily think we need to. But if the board thinks they need to discuss more, then we do it. We add another meeting. The law is you only have to meet every other month. Like, that's the law. So we're going above and beyond. But that's my personal opinion. I probably I gave you more than you
No,
want.
Ms. Palmer, you've been waiting patiently. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. So just for a point of clarification, I don't think this has to be a draft agenda. This would be no different than if we put an agenda out for our discussion meeting. Any business that comes after that has to wait until the next month.
Yeah.
So if we put an agenda out 72 hours before when we have one meeting, that's the agenda. And if there are changes and additions, they wait until the next month, just like they would any other month. And then we're making, basically, we're settling the discussion. We're saying we're giving the public time, which is what some of our board members are asking, and we're making it a stagnant, this is it, which, Mr. Caligiuri, to your point, we don't want to continue to make changes and expect everyone to keep up. So my recommendation would be we stick with one meeting, as the administration has recommended, in a month where we might not have a lot of business, and we put out an agenda, 72 hours a week, whatever the board wants, that is the final agenda that will be discussed, and any changes or any additions move to the next month just like they would. Does that work?
For me, it does, yeah.
Yes.
Give the public what they can finalize on and move forward. They don't play with the public.
Ms. Charter-Whit's good.
I just have a quick comment. And to that point, with the editing with the agenda, just because we have that opportunity doesn't necessarily, like Mrs. Whitmore's saying, I don't think it necessarily means we have to edit it just because we have that ability to do so. But if we do, in that October, we have the week, is there a way that we can push it on the app to say, this is a little bit different than normal? Can you send out the quick push to the app that our families use? Does that take a lot of extra time, or?
I feel like if we get out of our norm, everything's out there. I mean, I don't want to sound insensitive, but you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. If everything's out there and people aren't getting that information, there has to be some onus on the people that aren't getting that information. It's out there. It's always out there. If we put it out there 72 hours instead of 24 hours, now they have 2 extra days. My phone's not ringing off the hook. I assume yours isn't. You said yours isn't. People aren't arguing or complaining about the lack of information. Like, what we're doing is working. We just created this issue 4 minutes ago when we started talking about it. Am I correct in that assumption?
I think it was 20, but
20,
I think I'm
okay.
correct.
So, I mean, we made this up, like, this isn't real. Do we have 5 to move this forward as is on the document?
Yeah.
That's 4.
I'm sorry,
Are we?
with the 72 hours, I'm sorry, that's what I meant to say, with the 72 hours for the 1 month meetings.
The only question is, as it is, it's October, not November.
I'm okay with whatever administration wants. I'm
Okay.
good with.
No, February's 2.
It's timing of everybody's lives and I'm okay. As long as if we just do some better practice for those 1 meetings, I'm happy.
Okay, that moves forward. Dr. Anderson, you have the floor.
I think I'm done, right?
Jen, can you make a note that, that we need to have that out in advance, okay?
I have no further items, Mr. Devine. My section is complete.
Then I'll take the floor back.
Anderson.
Safe and supportive schools, Mr. Adams is not here. Dr. Walsh, thank you. Budget and finance, Ms. Chudowitz, lead board liaison.
For the budgetary, sorry, my microphone was off. For the budgetary items, 1 through 3, does anybody have any questions regarding those as listed? Okay. Do we have 5 to move those forward?
Yeah.
And letter B, the Act 57.
Hold on, I don't think we had 5. We had,
Oh, we do.
5.
okay, thank you, go ahead.
And so for letter B, the Act 57 waiver resolution, the link is attached, and it's a very specific outline of legislation that came down that we can choose to resolve. Mr. Manzer, do you have anything to add here that you think that everybody should be aware of? I know this is very detailed, but.
It's just a common issue that has come up, and this is a way that the tax collector can administratively take care of an issue, of an administrative issue that occurs with some tax bills, and there's very specific guidance there on how this is to be administrated.
Do we have 5?
And letter C, I welcome Amy Lewis, partner with Meyer and Dushel, to do her audit presentation. Thank you for coming this evening.
Thank you all. I promise to be brief with my presentation. I know you all have a lot to work on with the budget. Just, as before, just some highlights about the audit process, just some quick financial highlights to go over what we audited, and then certainly if you have any questions, I'm happy to take those. So you can move forward whenever. We are in the process of wrapping up the audit for fiscal 22. There are some open items to be left to be done related to the single audit with your federal funding, and just some other administrative matters that have to happen in order to close out any audit, things that we have to make sure we do right up until the final opinion date of the audited statement. So those are all things that will happen. And we'll finalize all that, but we did provide you with the draft financial statements. I don't anticipate any major changes to those financial statements through the course of our work, but certainly if something were to happen, we would communicate that back out. The expected deliverables are consistent with what we do every year. We will issue a independent auditor's opinion on your financial statements, which means that we will determine, based on our audit tests and procedures, that your financial statements are fairly stated in all material respects, and that they are presented in accordance with U.S. generally accepted accounting standards. We will also issue an independent auditor's report on the government auditing standards and as required by the uniform guidance. Those are specific because of the government funding that you get. As I mentioned with the single audit, we do some additional testing on your financial reporting and internal control over financial reporting and compliance. with specific federal programs. We rotate those every year. We are asked by the federal government to look at specific criteria in each of those programs that we rotate and then report back as to whether or not we have any findings or other issues, to report to you. So we'll have those audit opinions, as part of that package. We do issue the communication to those charged with governance letter, which kind of really it captures all the things that I'm talking about tonight, just some things that were required by the auditing standards to relay back to you as the school board about the audit. There is a data collection form that is a form that gets filed with the federal clearinghouse that is your reporting of your single audit, of the audit. So it goes up on this website. It's a form that gets filled out that's specific to certain criteria that you have to report. It attaches a copy of your audited financial statements, and then it is available for people to search. And grantors can utilize that as part of their compliance and oversight responsibility on the school district. So that we help to complete as part of the audit process. There was no written management letter this year, which is good news. That's saying that your staff is doing a really good job of making sure that the financial records are complete, they're accurate, they're ready to be audited. We come in, Ryan and his staff are really wonderful to work with. They have a good handle on things. They understand the accounting standards that they have to comply with. They understand all of the PDE financial reporting requirements. We're able to work through all of our tests and get all of our questions answered and get all the documents that we need. And so no issues with conducting the audit. So that's reflected in the fact that we don't have any recommendations for internal controls. So some of the things that I just need to make sure that I communicate with you all that I do every year. So I'm sure you might remember this from before. Again, this slide talks about the things I talked about already, like what we do as part of the audit, what our function is. Again, these are not our financial statements, they are the school district's financial statements, so ultimately all we own is the opinion. You all are the ones who own the rest of the financial statements. So even though we do assist you in drafting those and putting those together, ultimately at the end of the day, they are the property of the school district. You can go to the next slide. There were some new accounting standards that were effective for this year. I feel like I have to say that every year. It never stops. I actually became an auditor because I didn't want to deal with tax law changing every year, and I feel like now we just have audit and accounting standards that change every year, so it didn't really help me out in that case. The big one that I've been talking about for a couple of years with you all was the leases standard. And so really ultimately what happened was it didn't really have a significant impact to your financial statements. You do have leases, and some of those you were already reporting under the old accounting rules, so the new accounting rules didn't really change those leases that you had always been holding. So you will see that there are arrangements in your financial statements, but then Ryan and his team evaluated the rest of your leases and determined that there wasn't anything else new that had to go onto your financial statements as a result of the new accounting standard. So as of now, should you enter into different leasing arrangements, over the course of time, those will always have to be reevaluated to see, do they now have to come onto the financial statements under the guise of this new standard? And that's something that they'll make sure that they keep up to date on. But certainly, again, they are very well understanding of the standard, and I think have processes and ideas in place of how to make sure that they are always in compliance with that. No other major changes to anything as a result of any of those accounting standards, and you didn't internally change anything that had an impact to your financials. We do believe you have all the appropriate disclosures. We had no difficulties in performing the audit. We did not have to propose any material audit adjustments, again, which is a testament that your financials that you're using throughout the course of the year are accurate and reliable sources of information. As I said, single audit testing still in process. We're not anticipating any issues, and we had no disagreements or any other, consultations or anything that we need to tell you about. Again, the audit was conducted with full cooperation of everybody. I talk every year about this. This number doesn't go down, but this is a quick snapshot of your pension and other post-employment benefit liability that goes on to your financial statements as a result of accounting standards that were implemented a couple of years ago. You can see there were some changes to these numbers this year, really having a lot to do with the market. The net pension liability did go down across the state because the market really helped the investment that was going up against the liability that gets calculated by the actuary. The OPEB, on the other hand, did have an increase across the board for all the school districts, so you'd see a slight increase for that. And then your separate retiree health plan had a slight increase as well. Certainly with the PSERS, there have been changes to the options for employees. So, with the defined contribution plan element that's coming in, the point of that was to try to level out this liability issue, but it's going to take a while because you still have the majority of the retirees and current employees are still in the defined benefit portion. So it's going to take some time till that defined contribution really gains weight and has an impact to this liability. So you're unfortunately going to see this, still for a long time to come. Quick financial highlights, thinking back to June 30, 22. I know you all are even moving forward a whole other year from where I'm at, so I don't want to spend too much time. But just as a reminder, you had your property taxes were levied at just over 22 mils. No new debt issuance that you had during the year. You did pay approximately $8.1 million in debt service payments, which is principal and interest. You had some capital projects for the roof, the concrete, some buses, other projects that are part of these financial statements. And Title I and ESSER will be the major federal programs that we audit as part of the single audit because of the amount of funding that you did. Quick snapshot of your general fund balance. Big thing to note here is you do have a couple categories, things that you've assigned for certain purposes, things that are unassigned that then are left to the discretion of the district, not necessarily earmarked for anything in particular. And so that represents about 8% of your expenditures, which is pretty in line with where the school districts are generally finding themselves or hoping to find themselves to be. The next slide or two are just real high level budgetary reviews. I know you all are going to be looking a lot deeper into the budget, but you'll see, really some ebbs and flows between your expenses and revenues. You did have some increases in 22 in taxes, most notably real estate taxes, deed transfer taxes, things like that. And then, some increases in some of your subsidies, especially, with the ESSER money flowing through and things like that. Some of that ESSER money then, on the flip side, does, also kind of impact the expense side as well. And then you did have some budget savings in some of your salaries and pension expense and medical expense, so versus where you are. So if you look at this page is the revenues, the next page is the expenses. But really, at this high level, nothing to really jumps out at you as being anything of a concern. I always like to show this schedule also as part of this presentation, just because as you're thinking through, every year for the next several years, you're going to be committed to $8 million of debt service payments. And your final maturity, should you not do anything with your debt at any point, would be 2040. So obviously that's a long time away, so I'm sure something will happen to this schedule before that. But certainly that's just something, to keep in mind, that is a big chunk of your budget plan every year. Finally, I think just some future considerations. Much by the way of the leases, the next major project that Ryan and his team will have to tackle is a very similar standard that has to do with subscription-based information technology arrangements, so certain software and other types of programs that you are essentially leasing. They get looked at kind of in the same light, so that'll be a major project that he'll have to look at to see what qualifies to be reported on your financial statements. You still have COVID money running through some of the ESSER money, just for another year or so. So just, making sure that that money is still getting spent appropriately, that you're not letting your guard down as to, monitoring and following all the rules with that. Budget constraints always is an issue. Certainly every school district is in the same, boat as far as, different revenue streams, different allocations of revenue, things like that. So certainly something of a concern that needs to be addressed, certainly tonight. Cybersecurity also, we would be remiss if we don't mention that. We would mention that with pretty much all of our clients, just because it certainly is a risk and something to always be thinking about and making sure that you're comfortable with what you're doing to protect the district from any, hacks or people trying to get in to your systems inappropriately. So we just like to caution you on all of those items. But again, nothing where we are saying that there's anything specific that we have a recommendation or we feel you have a weakness for. We just like to keep these things in the front of your mind as part of the audit process. With that, that's all I really have to say tonight, but I'm certainly happy to take any questions.
I just wanted to jump in and thank your local team. Wonderful to work with. Even the firm, at the firm level, they've implemented this electronic software that we can really share information back and forth. Even the professional development, they invite all their clients to their professional development sessions. Amy leads those, just tremendous firm to work with, and even consulting on those lease standards. She gave a special session that we worked through just to make sure that we were all on the same page, and really appreciate the partnership.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for your time. I hope you have a good rest of your meeting, and we'll see you next year, I guess.
Thank you.
Run away now.
Do you want me to turn this off now? Okay. Alrighty.
Ryan, before you get started, I just want to say that I would think I'm speaking on behalf of the board. I just love when those audits are boring. Because it says that your department is doing what they need to do in the most ethical, efficient, and best practice way that you could possibly do that. And I just think it's important that we recognize, although there's not a lot of lights and glimmer to an audit report. When you get a clean one, it's something to be celebrated. So hats off to you and to your department. Great job.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move into the budget workshop presentation tonight. What's that? Yes, you do.
Do we have 5 to move C forward?
Yes.
Without further ado, I welcome Mr. Manzer for his budget workshop. And thank you, Ryan.
Okay, thank you. Those statements too, they're in draft form. So if anybody has any comments, feel free to get in touch with me. So moving on to the budget workshop presentation, I did want to pause on this slide. I think sometimes we can sort of take that for granted and skip over it, but I've seen over the last year and a half or so that I've been here is that having this as a sort of a foundational guide has been tremendously helpful. We talk about maximizing fiscal responsibility in every single one of our meetings, and to have that level of focus and to already have it be in place as I walked in the door, I can't say enough about this as a guide, and even with the process-driven focus, when you talk about a budget, very important in the continuous improvement. And then of course that integrity at the top, just taking a moment to know that, this has been very foundational in how we're able to prepare moving forward. And so I appreciate the board adopting this, and using it as a foundation as we move forward. You can go ahead to the next one. So, this is our menu for tonight. I always hate a menu that doesn't have pictures, and so there's no pictures here, but as we go through, there's plenty of pictures. We'll come back to this as a guide as we move through. Just for navigational purposes, I'm full in on Plum with our links, so it is all linked up. You have a ton of information. We're not going to touch on every single thing that's in here, but if you want to go through it on your own and open up any of the links, have at it. Navigationally too, there's on the left-hand side there's that budget development components link that's on the left-hand side. If you ever get lost, hit that link and you'll go back to this menu, and we can kind of go back to the top. So we'll move on to the first one. Budget results and forecast. You just heard the independent auditors. They are independent from management, so they're giving their, that was an independent presentation. They're sort of assessing us as management, as well as making sure that your financial statements are accurate. It's always important for me to look back, reflect on prior year results. And those prior year results inform the budget changes that we're looking at for even really the current year. We can kind of revise some of those projections. And then for future years' budgets, certainly we put those in the projections. So my first step is always looking back at those actual results and not getting in the habit of just saying prior year budget, next year budget, prior year budget. The actual results are very important. Same thing with our year-to-date results for the current year, is I always make sure I'm keeping an eye on those. If you open up the general fund revenue year-to-date November, the two top lines on this report, you get this report every month, are probably the most important from a local perspective, is that current real estate taxes and interim real estate taxes. We have split out, last year we split this out for the first time, is our interim real estate taxes. The reason why I mention this is that the current real estate taxes is an important number to forecast. You're always looking at your collection rate. And splitting out interim real estate taxes has made it a little bit more difficult to look back at prior year results and make sure that your current year forecast or future year's forecast is accurate. So as we move through December, and then even there's final deposits in January for those current real estate taxes, that's a number that I'm going to really key in on. So we'll revisit that as we go through these next couple months. If you want to go back to our menu, you can go all the way back to the menu slide. Yep. So that's where we sort of reset there, taking a good look at our current year budget and future year forecast. The next thing I wanted to touch on is the balance sheet approach. It's really important, and I think you heard some of that come through in the previous presentation, is from an accountant's perspective, when we're looking at any company, it's very important to look at the balance sheet. The balance sheet really represents the cumulative results of the district for all of history. So any of the variances in revenue or expense, any past history, accumulations of debt, saving, accumulations of saving over years. You see it in their cash balance, you see it in your fund balance. When I say balance sheet approach, that's what I mean. You really see the all of history in your balance sheet. The revenue and expense is just that quick 1 year look, but you really see that all of history in your balance sheet approach. So just pulling out, and there's not a lot on a school district balance sheet, there's not a lot, but pulling out, if you look on the left-hand side, your general fund cash and fund balance, as well as your capital projects fund cash and fund balance. The blue and the red line represent your general fund. The yellow and the green line represent your capital projects fund. The work that this district has done over the past number of years to get from your starting point there on the graph in 2017 to now has been very hard work, very important work. It's been working in the right direction. Congratulations for doing the hard work. And we are doing our very best to keep that trend going in the right direction. It's really important to look at that fund balance and to make sure you keep it going in the right direction. The capital projects, the thing to note on there, and even a little bit on your general fund, some of that increase has related to additional debt borrowings. So we borrowed for capital projects. We even borrowed a little bit for operations. And it's important to drive those increases in fund balance in both of those funds using your own cash. So that's an additional focus. You will see that the capital projects balance is decreased, but that's just because you spent down some of those bond offerings, and now we're using our own cash. So we're going to start building that up using our own cash. If you look on the right-hand side at the top, that's our fund balance as a percent of next year's budget. Same line as the previous graph that you'll see, but I put a target line there of 25%. And that target line is a key performance indicator. So this board has adopted the key performance indicators for your fiscal responsibility goal, and that's one of them, is to try to get there over the long term. So there's some pretty aggressive, I alluded to that before, is aggressive moves to add to fund balance that you may not be able to achieve, but that's the target line. If you're at 25%, you're going to be upgrading your credit ratings. You're going to be really a high level, considered a really financially responsible district in comparison to your peers. The final chart there on the bottom right hand side is your debt liability, your total debt balance, and you see the green, the blue line slowly decreasing over time, which is just stepping through your debt schedule. You're not borrowing additional debt, you're paying off debt. That's that $8 million figure that Amy referenced in the earlier presentation. And then same is the net pension liability. It can't be ignored. It's really not something that it's not on your fund statement, so it's not something you see every month, but it's on your financial statements for the year, is that's a huge cost that we're incurring every single year. And it's not talked about anymore at the state level, really, because it's very hard to fix. But when you borrow significantly, which that's effectively what we've done with our pension plan, it just takes a number of years to pay it off. So in 2010, it's going to take, they enacted legislation where it's going to take 24 years to pay that balance off. So once you get that past that 24 years, you're going to have a low pension plan because they've done all the revisions to the plan necessary to make it a low annual cost, but it's going to take that 24 years to pay it off. We can go back to our menu there.
What's the difference between cash and investments and fund balance? Dumb question, I know, but.
Yeah, I was going to touch on that a little bit, and I may have skipped over it, is that your net difference between your assets and liabilities is your fund balance. Your cash just represents the cash you have in your bank. It's very possible, and you see other districts operate with negative fund balance. So they've borrowed, they have cash on hand, but they have more liabilities than they do assets.
So fund balance can include borrowed money? Is that kind of what you're telling me?
Essentially, what happens if you're in balance, a lot of times the difference is attributable to assets that can't be liquidated, such as inventory. Mm-hmm. So, and you also have like things like accounts receivable and accounts payable that can kind of balance out. But essentially, at the end of the day, your cash and your fund balance are pretty much reflected. They're a very similar trend line, mm-hmm. But they're not the same thing. It's important to recognize that they're not the same thing. Okay, hot topics. I knew this had to be addressed. It's the reason why it's on the menu. These are things that are potentially impacting our budget, but we're going to do a really good job to try to go through our line item details and see what the actual impact is in our budget. That's sort of my job, is to figure out what the actual impact is in our budget. Staff shortages, certainly they exist. We've talked a lot about them, specifically in the areas of our nurses, our bus drivers, and our food service workers. The trick here is that our staff shortages actually are positive budget variances. So we save money when there's staff shortages. Obviously, that is not a good thing for the district, but it's something to know just from a planning perspective, is that if you do see these past positive variances, it may be because of the staff shortage, where if we fill those positions consistently moving forward, we may not have those variances reoccur. It's just something to consider from a budget perspective. On the bottom left is inflation chart, long range, really. And, you know, inflation's high. You hear a lot about it in the news. We're going to make sure that from our budget detailed perspective, that we're only reflecting the actual increases that we're experiencing. So we're not just going to go out there and say, hey, everybody's budget's increased by 8%. That's not the way we're going to do it. But you're going to see, we're going to, specifically things like fuel, that the reality is that fuel costs have gone up. So we're going to probably have to make budget adjustments for that. But we're going to do it more specifically than just in general. State funding, on the upper right-hand side there, you can see that the red bar relates to state funding. As a dollar amount, that's actually gone up over time, but as a percentage of our budget, that's actually gone down. So this chart reflects percentage of budget. You've seen the commitment from the local level has stayed very consistent, and also just from the blue bars there, the federal funding, we talk a lot about federal funding, you know, that is still a very small percentage of our budget. So just something to keep in mind, how much state funding and local funding is needed to fund the school district and how little federal funding there is. Now, it is important to talk about this, so I blew it up there. The federal funding cliff is what I labeled it on the right-hand side. We're sort of building this up, but it is going to significantly drop off, and I'll touch on that a little bit later in the presentation. If you want to go back to the menu here, our projects, we've talked a lot about these board presentations on these projects. I'll touch on each one just briefly. Kindergarten task force recommendations to reevaluate effectively in 25-26, with also the goal to try to do as much planning as possible, so that when we do reevaluate, that there's a realistic chance that, you know, the conversation or the conclusion maybe is different. Impacts on these other areas, such as our capital project plan, under development, we're going to deliver that back to you, and that plan is going to more specifically break out what projects we need to do in our buildings over the next 5 years, in each of the next 5 years, plus groupings in 5 to 10 and 10 to 15. So you're going to still get that long-term look. One of the capital projects is that O-Block Elementary and middle school feasibility study that we've been talking about. Hayes Design is going to come back to you likely in February with a set of recommendations. And there's real costs in there. There's $13.9 million of costs identified. So that's an important part of our capital project planning moving forward. And that also has considerations of full-day kindergarten. So that is baked into that analysis. And then debt reduction. When you talk about these projects and the need to potentially borrow money, that cuts exactly against our unstated goal, I'll say, of this debt reduction target, is that a best practice would be to have a 10% level of debt service to your total budget. We're well above that. Again, the red line is your target line, the blue line is your actual debt service. So every opportunity that we have moving forward, we need to try to reduce that annual debt service line towards that 10% target.
Why did it go up? Because we didn't borrow on 21-22.
Your annual debt service, it is just a percentage of the budget. So your
I see what you're saying. Never mind. You're good.
To answer your question though, your debt service actually is still increasing. So you had planned increases to sort of layer in your debt service. And so we added money into this year's budget for increased debt service, and that there's still steps to go in that process. It's very important to recognize that, is that we're still not done layering in that debt service. It's not new debt, it's just planned increases.
Gotcha.
So the 5-year forecast sort of lives at the middle of this, so that's where we're going to end. Key performance indicators, they're just linked there for your information. On the second page of this is where we've done a presentation on this separately, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But these are the new key performance indicators, and it relates to percentage of fund balance. We've already talked about that. Our credit rating improvements, we talked a lot about that. Our contributions to capital projects. This is layered into the budget model that you'll see is starting with a $200,000 contribution planned, not just the end of the year contribution, all the way to the 5 years is a planned $1 million contribution per year at the end of this plan. And that might be tough to achieve, but that's what's going to be in our plan. Back to our menu there, just a few quick talking points, no slides here or links. Process improvement, it's really important from a operation standpoint that we're continuing to improve on our accounting procedures. If you see some of these frauds that have come about lately in the news, they haven't had the proper accounting procedures, advisors, whatever it may be, and we're continuing that all the time. I look back at my past presentation in May, and there was a lot we talked about our process improvement, so I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but we're continuing our personnel budgeting. We've improved a lot in that area. It continues to add value that you won't really see, but being very detailed on our personnel budgeting is something that we've really tried to improve. Our new line item budgeting that we've really tried to improve as well. And then simple things like a time clock implementation. We're doing a lot of work just to improve that process. And it's very simple, but if you have a really good payroll process, you're less likely to make mistakes, less likely to have audit errors, your budget tends to be more accurate. It just leads to a better environment. Touching on executive session, I wanted to touch on it in public, is that we have current contracts in place, long-term employment contracts with all of our unions, and those are coming due. So we have to go through that process. These are being discussed. They are being discussed, though, in executive session. Additionally, our staffing process, we do a lot of work internally on our staffing process to make sure that we're staffed appropriately. Also, those discussions occur in executive session. Tax revenue is always a fun topic. I put in there these tax rate comparisons. There's a ton of information out there. This is just a selection of schools. The previous slide sort of has a trend of some of the popular schools. This is just a one-year snapshot of every school in Allegheny County, with the exception of one outlier that I took out to make the graph a little bit more readable. The line is Plum. You can kind of peruse for your own information other school districts. Some are hard to understand. A direct neighbor of us, Penn Hills, has a very, very high tax rate. Some of the others, sort of like, I can't quite see them beside us, but Quaker Valley, for instance, I believe is one right beside us. They're, in this graph at least, they have a lower tax rate, and it's just because they have a different tax base. They may have less students, they may have more businesses development, they might just have a different tax base, and it might also be growing at a different rate than what Plum is. So you have to look at each school individually is the lesson here. If you want to go back to the previous chart, I just want to touch on this real quick, is that every school goes about their tax increases differently. You can see that Upper St. Clair on the far right, they just have consistent increases year after year. That you can tell that that is a consistent plan that they've put in place. They might also be trying to achieve something, so they might be trying to build a building. There's lots that can go into that strategy. Plum's strategy has been more, let it sit for as long as we can, and then maybe do a jump. And I think it's just something that we should continue to discuss over time. We've talked about it a little bit last year, is some potential strategy to have more consistent lower tax increases to try to make those jumps a little bit easier to handle. But it's something I think that should just be continued to be discussed. The 23-24 tax rate analysis. This just gives you a high-level picture of what we're dealing with for this moving into next year's budget cycle. You have our current year assessments. Our 23-24 assessments are reflected there, and that is a really current number. The increase is only $72,000, and that, I believe, directly relates to the CLR litigation that is occurring at the county level, where all of our tax assessment appeals have been effectively frozen. And we're being told to not count on any assessed value increase for next year, and that's what we're doing. So the only increases I'm going to take credit for are the ones that are actually in place. And that's a change. It's a change that has to be recognized, that we may not be able to rely on those increases in assessed value, especially in the immediate future, but potentially even in the long term. We hope that it's going to return to normal is the theory, but we need some experience under this new CLR to figure out what's actually going to happen. And then you can kind of see, I just try to give you our 5.4% index, and I try to give you some just markers there. So you got a quarter of the index and a half of the index, and you can see what an index would do, $1.9 million to the district, and then that taxpayer calculation is down below to where you can see the monthly increases to say somebody's mortgage invoice or bill, escrow account, $3, $6, and $11 a month is what those would attribute. And then this all comes together into our 5-year forecast. So if we want to go to our summary, just from a high level, I did back into the tax increases after, as sort of the final step in the forecast, and you'll see that in the last slide. It's very important just to keep your increases in revenue aligned with your increases in expenses in the long run. And that's what this plan puts forth. The sort of the bottom of that has the fund balance as a percent of expenditures. It is something I'm slightly concerned with, is that we're flat to decreasing within this model. But I also know that there's going to be positive budget variances that we're going to add along the way. And I need to play this out a little bit to see how concerned or not I should be. I think having a balanced budget with adding those positive variances could still achieve our goals. And if it does not, then I think you need to be a little bit more aggressive either on adding revenue or reducing expenses in this model. It's just that simple. But I think a balanced model is appropriate at this time. You can just go to the next slide. Here's your revenue analysis. I did change the local assumptions based on that history that you see there on the left side, and on the right side there is the big point to realize is our ESSER funding is going to end. So that's ESSER 2, $289,000 decrease in next year's budget. The following year thereafter is going to be a $934,000 decrease. It's a pretty significant drop off in funding. And it's important messaging, I would say, for you as board members, community members in general, is that that's going to be an issue for us. So things like social workers that have been funded by these federal grants, if you want to retain them, currently your only option is local revenue. It would be wonderful if the state stepped up and replace some of that funding. It would be wonderful if the federal government stepped up and replaced some of that funding. There may be a little bit of momentum to do that, but the message needs to continue to be developed. So that would be a goal. I am slightly hopeful that that may be lessened, that impact, that decrease, that cliff may be lessened a little bit by some additional revenue, but I definitely believe that it's not going to be eliminated. So we need to plan for it. Expenditure analysis, I didn't change a whole lot on this from the previous year. The medical increase is significant for next year. 15% is what I put in there. They've said as high as 18. I've heard as low as a double digit, which could be 10%. We'll see how that plays out throughout the end of the year. And then additionally, an 8% thereafter. That 8% for medical was a little bit in question when all of a sudden we may have a 15 to 18% increase. So that's definitely a category I'm watching for the long haul. And then the budget process really is to get more specific. So as I go through all of the details, I may come back to some of this and revise maybe some conservative estimates down, or if needed, the other way too. But these are some pretty high level projections. And then finally, the millage rate analysis that I have here for you. The 1.8% in next year is, again, something I backed into to be able to produce a balanced budget, and sort of adjusted. The increase that we forecasted last year was 4.75% in 2025, and so I adjusted that to 5.3%. You see the same 2.5 increase, and then I also had to adjust that out year that we added to the model to 3.2%, and that has most likely to do with the debt service plan. I put actual debt service moving forward, and so there's a little bit more of a challenge in those years, but again, that's a pretty far out year. I do believe that my goal, personal goal, I would say, is that between now and April, May, when we're doing our budget process, is to try to get that tax increase or that balanced budget to have a 0% increase in the millage rate. I'll be able to tell you more as I move along the budget process. And the other thing to consider is, last year I put out, and I can do so again in the future, I think once we hear more about what the kindergarten full day kindergarten impact could be within these facility studies, that's going to be a key piece of information to be able to develop that plan a little bit more. And then I can sort of come back to you and give you a more formal plan on what it would take to do that over a 5-year period. But just as a reminder, sustained increases in revenue is what it would take. There was a 3.5% increase 3 years in a row that it would take to put that plan in place, and that is what we would be dealing with. So if there was an aggressive movement to that, you'd really want to look at this year starting to layer some of that in. You'll see too that it's more clearly defined in that chart on the bottom right, is those are your percentage increases in taxes. So you still kind of have this plan of where to make up for that federal revenue, you're going to have to, increase the millage rate there all at one time and then sort of start to level off. And if you wanted to talk further about that plan, we certainly could, and I could put models together for you, but just to set up that conversation the following years without any further action at the state or federal level, that's going to be a necessary step to take. And I guess going back to the menu, this is just me trying to put all the pieces together. If there's other pieces that you want to see, feel free to let me know, and I can put those into future presentations, specifically when we go into our budget timeline, which this presentation is all meant to give you information that allows you to take the next step in your agenda is to pass your resolution that says you will not go beyond the index, which is 5.4%. So I think this information clearly shows you that you don't, for next year, you don't need to go beyond the index. Any questions for me? Thank you.
Lots of questions, but I'll let you go.
Lots of questions, but more information needed. Still have a lot hanging out there, you know, feasibility. So, yeah.
All right, thank
If you
you.
ever turn the heat off, thank you.
They just opened the door.
I guess my tax dollars right out the door.
And thank you, Ryan, for the incredible, all the work that you've done to prepare that budget workshop. So really appreciate the detail that you've put into it.
I love the food menu. Big fan.
And the last for budget would be, as Mr. Manzer mentioned, a letter E, the opt-out resolution, to move that forward to, we have that for?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I find it is a huge relief to be in a place where we can be comfortable voting to opt out. So I thank you very much for all of your hard work, Mr. Manzer.
I have to agree with you 100%. It's nice to be able to go to the community, and it's at a really high rate. The index is at 5.4, Ryan?
Yeah.
Is 5.4?
Yep.
To, number one, say that we're not going to go above that. We don't need to go above that because we're both budgetarily, I mean, we're 1.8 out, basically, and I think we're going to be able to find our way to that 1.8. But we have a lot of decisions to make. But we're in a really good place. So we're not in a great place. We're in a good place, and we're getting better, and we want to continue to get better. So, and that's a testament to the board, for the previous boards that had the guts to make some really tough decisions, and the boards that have come in and have tried to make improvements to the districts. Into the district, whether it be athletic facilities, whether it be curriculum, whether it be hiring, the right folks to help our kids, to provide safety nets for our kids. I think that's maybe why we don't have a lot of people in the audience, because they know we're heading in the right direction. So, a tip of the cap to the board as well.
Did we have 5 for that?
Yes.
All right, Ms. Shuttleworth, anything else?
I have nothing else for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Facilities and Operations, Mr. Hill, Lead Board Liaison.
Yeah, we need a roof right outside that door, it sounds like. Any questions on that? Do you have any questions on that? It's like right out there? Yeah. Is this the same company that did the roof over by the auditorium? Do you know?
This is our traditional contractor. They do a really good job. I sat through a whole presentation on our roof plan. This is just one step in a plan. This is a roof that's out of warranty. It has been of concern. The one benefit here also is that your pricing by approving this in December is going to be the 2022 pricing.
Yeah.
They will hold that pricing, order their material, and then schedule this for the summertime. If we were to pass this in 2023, there's a significant planned increase in that pricing. So there's a little bit of an incentive to get this passed now as opposed to later. But this work will not occur until the summertime.
And like you mentioned, this was something we knew, we were prepared for, and we got it covered.
And they do have a plan moving forward as well, and we're going to layer all that stuff into our capital project plan with our other projects.
Do you know, if I look at this picture, if the white roof is the new roof and the other roof is the old roof? I'm just trying to figure out if there's more roofs to come.
I was talking and I didn't hear your question. I apologize.
There are areas of this roof that they wanted us to evaluate.
Yeah.
And we thought we could get a little bit more life out of certain areas, and they weren't of as an immediate concern. And we're also thinking of our capital project budget to make sure that we have some additional funds sitting there, that we don't sort of spend it all at once. But yes, there are other areas of this roof that are of concern or that are out of warranty, and even some of our other buildings that we've talked about that are soon to come.
Do we have 5 to move that forward?
Get a roof.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Hold on, Mr. Hill, don't you have the one that shows that the heating system is working really well?
It's definitely working really
I
well.
thought that was on facility operations.
My
for
face
that.
was melting off.
Nobody's gonna freeze
We're
in
gonna
the
call you
60-degree
the-
weather.
The snow miser.
Don't make me start taking clothes off in these meetings.
I was just surprised it wasn't on the agenda.
Need a week's notice.
Forbes Road CTC, Mr. Hill, League Board Liaison, anything for tonight?
I have nothing for tonight.
Intergovernmental, myself, League Board Liaison, I have nothing for tonight. Legislative, Mrs. Stepnick, League Board Liaison, anything for tonight?
Just that I will start working with our pilot on an agenda to do my annual invites with the board's okay with it, to invite legislators. Of course, with the passing of Representative DeLuca, that spot is still remaining open through February, but at the end of it, again, I think we can figure out, bringing whoever gets elected to that position later on into the spring or early summer after they get their feet wet. But I'd like to invite at least Senator Brewster and Representative Markosik to come in the next couple of months to lay out the legislative agenda and talk to us about our questions, concerns, PSBA and whatnot going forward.
Thank you. Policy, Mr. Caligiuri, League Board Liaison.
Yeah, sure. So, first one, section A is policy 005. Every year we have to update this for the next calendar year. We're going to keep the Trib and the Valley News Dispatch as our newspaper record. And then the designation of meetings will stay the same. You just note the dates, January 2023 through December 23. Is there any discussion on those? We have 5 to move those forward.
Yes, sir.
All right, yeah, looks like we have 5. The second one is draft policy 011. If you look at the link, you'll see that there are changes in green. Those are PSBA recommended changes. And then there are district recommended changes in red as at the end. It's basically a catch-all for the board to be held as accountable as we do for the people that we set policy for, such as all of the employees in the district. So you can read that section, and then if there's any discussion on that, we can have it.
I'd like to make a recommendation that the part in red be moved to the lead responsibly section of the policy, because I think that it reflects leadership and might be a better fit there. And that perhaps we consider wording it something like demonstrate strong leadership by adhering to all district policies. But that's just my opinion.
Anyone else?
There are 5 people who want to move it up to. Did you want it under lead responsibly? Is that what you said? This is what.
Yeah, the very first, lead responsibly. I just feel that it's a reflection of leadership and that it's a better fit there.
What was that one again you were moving?
If you
the
go,
red
it's,
section.
yeah, it's the red section at the very end, abide by any and all policies that are also subject to district personnel, volunteers, guests, and visitors. I just feel like that where it's at now under govern effectively, I just feel like it's more of a leadership trait personally.
I don't have any.
Does it matter if you have an opinion on that one way or another? I know this was my personal request, conversation last month, but Jane, does it matter one way or another where it sits?
No, that's just the discretion of the board.
I may add one disagreeing comment. The fact that it's under govern and it's governance and not management, maybe that's probably, I think the reason why it was there. So just food for thought.
I mean, I'm good with it being included. It was just in reading it, it just really reflected as a leadership quality, and it felt like it might be better placed.
It's still there, it's still bullet point, right?
Yeah, and I actually thought it was gonna go under act ethically, so.
I also considered
Just
that
put
as
it
well.
under each, copy paste under each one.
I'm splitting hairs at this
Yeah.
point. I just had to make it,
Yeah. When we talked about where, when we were making changes to this, we thought that the phrase itself was most important, but I certainly don't have a problem with moving it, but to me, it's fine where it's at. Do we have 5 people who are okay with the statement in red?
I'm okay with the statement.
Yes? All right. All right, we have 5 for that.
I guess to Amy's point, I feel like I think we have 5, and I like the word abide by better than the word lead from a legal standpoint. I like that part. So I liked your idea, and I don't care where it is, just as long as it's in there. But that's why I liked abide better.
Okay, so if we move it to the first, lead responsibly, do we have 5 to move it forward with the verbiage as it stands with that bullet point moved to the top?
Doesn't matter to me where it's at.
Yeah. That's it for policy.
Thank you. Equity and inclusion, Ms. Wetmore, lead board liaison.
Nothing for tonight, thank you.
All right, community engagement, outreach and development, Mrs. Stepnick, lead board liaison.
Just a couple things that I will have an update at the end of the month. One, I'm beyond excited, so I'm not gonna steal the thunder of Dr. Shulo, but our PTO at Holiday Park has agreed to purchase a book vending machine. So I'm looking forward to the board getting the information on what that is and what will be provided to our students. And also the chamber, I believe, was at the school yesterday. I've been under the weather on and off the last 3 days, so I did not get to go yesterday for the job fair. So I will have some information on that for everybody in the month.
Thank you. This time I'd like to open the floor to citizens' comments on non-agenda items. We have upcoming public meetings, board action meeting on Tuesday, December 20th, 2022 at 7 o'clock here in the high school library.